I'm Sabrina, 28, and I just realized I've been playing the role of unpaid intern in my own family's company for 5 whole years. The moment of clarity hit me like a freight train when my father handed my promotion to my brother without even pretending to consider my qualifications. His exact words? "Women don't understand business like men do." I stood there in his office, holding 5 years' worth of performance reports, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't apologize for existing. Instead, I walked out and made a decision that would bring their entire operation to its knees in exactly 72 hours. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely underestimated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this whole disaster began. It wasn't always like this, believe it or not. 5 years ago, I was fresh out of college with a business degree, optimistic about the future, and genuinely excited to work alongside my father in the family construction company he'd built from scratch. Davis Construction had been his life's work, and I thought joining the team would be my chance to prove I was worthy of carrying on the legacy. My first day, I arrived an hour early wearing my best business attire, ready to learn everything from ground up. Dad introduced me to the crew as my daughter who's here to help out while she figures out what she really wants to do. Not as the college graduate with a degree in business management, not as someone with fresh ideas and modern training, just as someone killing time. That should have been my first warning sign, but I was determined to earn their respect through hard work. I started in the office, handling scheduling, client communications, and paperwork. Basic tasks, sure, but I approached them with the same intensity I'd brought to my studies. Within weeks, I'd reorganized their filing system, implemented a digital scheduling platform, and streamlined their invoicing process. The efficiency improvements saved them hours each week, but somehow the credit always went to good business practices, rather than my specific contributions. When clients complimented our improved communication, Dad would nod and say the team was really stepping up their game, the team being a collective entity that apparently didn't include his daughter by name. Meanwhile, my brother Jake would show up whenever he felt like it, usually around 10 in the morning, sometimes not at all. Fresh out of community college with a general studies degree and absolutely no work experience, he was immediately given the title of operations coordinator and his own parking spot. I was still introducing myself as Richard's daughter to clients who couldn't figure out what my actual role was supposed to be. The pattern became clear pretty quickly, though I was too stubborn to admit it at the time. Jake's mistakes became learning opportunities. My suggestions became something we'll consider down the road. When I caught an error in a bid that would have cost us $12,000, Dad patted my shoulder and said I was really developing an eye for detail. When Jake forgot to order materials for 3 different job sites in 1 week, causing delays and angry contractors, Dad called it growing pains and took him out for a mentoring lunch. I wish I could say I recognized the favoritism immediately and stood up for myself. The truth is, I thought if I just worked harder, stayed later, and proved myself more thoroughly, things would change. Classic mistake number 1 in the handbook of daughters trying to earn their father's approval. So I doubled down. I started arriving at 7 in the morning and leaving at 7 in the evening. I took on weekend paperwork that wasn't technically my responsibility. When clients called with emergencies, I handled them personally, even if it meant working through lunch or staying until midnight to resolve scheduling conflicts. The company's customer satisfaction ratings improved dramatically. Our project completion times shortened. Repeat business increased by 30%. But somehow none of these improvements were ever connected to my specific efforts in any official capacity. They were just signs that Davis Construction was really hitting its stride as a company. Jake, meanwhile, had convinced Dad that he needed more hands-on experience with actual construction work, which meant he started showing up on job sites wearing brand new work boots and designer safety gear, taking selfies with the crew, and leaving after a couple hours to check on other projects. The crew started calling him Photo Op Jake behind his back, which should tell you everything you need to know about how seriously they took his contributions. But Dad saw initiative and leadership potential. He saw someone willing to get his hands dirty and connect with the working side of the business. He saw everything except the reality that Jake was treating construction sites like personal photo shoots for his social media presence. I started documenting everything. Every process improvement I implemented, every crisis I resolved, every client relationship I maintained. Part of me knew this was probably excessive, but another part of me sensed I was going to need proof of my contributions eventually. That turned out to be one of the smartest decisions I made during those 5 years. The real breaking point started building when Dad began talking about expanding the business and bringing in new leadership. Conversations about the company's future happened in restaurants I wasn't invited to, and meetings that somehow got scheduled when I was handling client calls. Year 3 was when things got truly insulting. Dad hired an outside consultant to evaluate our operations and suggest improvements. This consultant spent 2 weeks reviewing our processes, interviewing staff, and analyzing our efficiency metrics. His final report praised our digital systems, our customer service protocols, and our project management techniques, everything I had implemented over the previous 3 years. The consultant recommended promoting whoever had designed these systems to a management position with oversight responsibilities. Dad nodded thoughtfully and said they'd definitely consider that for the right candidate when the time came. The consultant literally handed him a roadmap for my promotion, gift-wrapped with professional validation, and Dad still couldn't connect the dots. Or maybe he could, and that was the problem. Maybe he saw exactly who had created the improvements and decided that acknowledging my contributions would complicate his vision of Jake inheriting the company. I started to suspect this around the time Jake got his own office while I was still working from a desk in the main reception area. Jake's office came with a nameplate, a window view, and a door he could close for important phone calls that usually involved coordinating weekend plans with his friends. My desk was positioned where every client, delivery person, and contractor could interrupt me with questions, requests, and complaints that somehow became my responsibility to resolve, regardless of whether they related to my official job duties. I became the unofficial problem solver for everything from scheduling conflicts, to billing disputes, to equipment malfunctions. When the coffee machine broke, people came to me. When a client wanted to modify their project timeline, they called me. When contractors needed clarification on specifications, they found my desk. I was essentially running customer service, project coordination, and crisis management for the entire company. But on paper, I was still listed as administrative assistant, with a salary that reflected that title rather than the scope of work I was actually performing. Jake, whose primary responsibilities seemed to involve looking busy and attending meetings about attending other meetings, was earning 30% more than me in his official operations coordinator role. The overtime was the final insult. Dad had a policy about approving overtime hours for hourly employees, but I was salaried, which meant all those extra hours I worked were essentially free labor. He'd walk by my desk at 7 in the evening, shake his head sympathetically, and say something like, "Hope you can wrap that up soon," before heading out to dinner with Mom. Meanwhile, Jake never worked past 5 unless there was a company barbecue or client event where he could network and take pictures. Somehow this demonstrated healthy work-life balance rather than lack of commitment. Everything I did was expected. Everything Jake did was impressive. I started keeping a detailed log of my hours and responsibilities, not because I thought I'd ever use it against them, but because I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining the inequality. Some weeks I was putting in 60 hours while Jake barely managed 35, and yet family conversations about the business always centered around his growing leadership potential. The promotion opportunity finally came up in my 5th year. Dad announced that the company was ready to create a new position, Director of Operations, someone to oversee daily management, client relations, and strategic planning. Essentially, someone to run everything I was already running, but with official authority and appropriate compensation. I prepared for that meeting like I was defending a dissertation. I compiled 5 years of performance data, client satisfaction surveys, efficiency improvements, and cost savings I'd generated. I documented every process I'd streamlined, every crisis I'd resolved, every improvement I'd implemented. The evidence was overwhelming. I had been functioning as the de facto director of operations for years. I walked into Dad's office that Tuesday morning, feeling more confident than I had in years. This was my moment. This was when all the extra hours, all the undercompensation, all the overlooked contributions would finally be acknowledged. This was when merit would triumph over family politics. I've been thinking about this director position, I began, opening my presentation folder. I believe my track record demonstrates— Sabrina, Dad interrupted, not even glancing at the documents I'd prepared. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I've already made my decision. The folder froze halfway open in my hands. You've made your decision? Jake is ready for more responsibility. This position will be perfect for him to grow into the leadership role this company needs. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Dad, can I show you these performance metrics? I think there might be some factors you haven't considered. He waved a hand dismissively. Honey, you do great work in your current role, but leadership requires a different kind of thinking. Women tend to focus on details and organization, which is valuable, but men understand the bigger picture of business strategy. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 5 years of proving my capabilities, after single-handedly improving every aspect of their operations, after sacrificing evenings and weekends to solve problems they couldn't handle, my father had just reduced my professional value to my gender. I don't think gender determines business capability, I said carefully. Of course not directly, he continued, completely missing the irony. But Jake has natural leadership instincts. He thinks about growth, expansion, taking calculated risks. That's what this company needs as we move forward. Jake, who had never completed a project independently, who needed reminders to show up on time, who couldn't handle basic client communications without creating confusion. This was the natural leader who understood business strategy better than someone with an actual business degree and 5 years of proven results. I sat there staring at my father, watching him convince himself that handing my promotion to my underqualified brother was somehow a sound business decision rather than blatant favoritism wrapped in sexist justification. When does Jake start in the new position? I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. Monday. We'll make the official announcement to the staff this afternoon. I closed my folder and stood up. I see. Well, congratulations to Jake. Dad smiled, apparently relieved that I was taking the news so well. I'm glad you understand, sweetheart. You're still a valuable part of this team. Valuable. Like office equipment or a reliable printer. Something useful but ultimately replaceable and certainly not worth investing in or promoting. I walked back to my desk in the reception area, my home base for 5 years while Jake got his windowed office, and sat down to think. Actually, let me rephrase that. I sat down to have what alcoholics probably call a moment of clarity, except instead of hitting rock bottom with drinking, I was hitting rock bottom with family-induced professional Stockholm syndrome. For 5 years, I had been working myself into the ground for people who saw my contributions as nothing more than what they were owed. I had been accepting subpar compensation, impossible workloads, and zero recognition because I thought family loyalty mattered more than self-respect. I had been enabling their success while sabotaging my own. But here's the thing about realizations. Once you see the truth clearly, you can't unsee it. And the truth was that Davis Construction had been exploiting my work ethic, my skills, and my naive belief that merit would eventually be rewarded. They had been getting director-level work for administrative assistant wages, and they planned to continue that arrangement indefinitely. That afternoon, I watched Dad announce Jake's promotion to the staff. He presented it as a natural progression, Jake's reward for showing initiative and leadership potential. Several crew members glanced in my direction with expressions that ranged from confused to sympathetic. They knew who actually kept the operation running smoothly, even if management refused to acknowledge it. After the announcement, Jake stopped by my desk with a patronizing smile. I hope we can keep working together, sis. I'm really going to need your support in this new role. Your support. Translation. I'm going to need you to keep doing all the actual work while I take credit for the results. Just like always, except now it would be official policy instead of just family dysfunction. Of course, I said sweetly. I'm sure you'll do great. That evening, I went home to my apartment and made myself a very deliberate decision. I was done. Not dramatically, not with screaming or ultimatums or emotional confrontations. Just done with being undervalued, overworked, and taken for granted. Starting tomorrow, I was going to give Davis Construction exactly what they paid for. The work of an administrative assistant. Nothing more, nothing less. No more 60-hour weeks. No more crisis management. No more solving problems that weren't explicitly part of my job description. They wanted Jake to be the director of operations? Perfect. He could direct operations. Without my safety net. Wednesday morning, I arrived at work at exactly 9 o'clock instead of my usual 7. Not late, mind you, just precisely on time according to my actual job description. I settled at my desk with my coffee and began working through my official responsibilities at a reasonable, sustainable pace. At 9:30, Jake appeared looking slightly frazzled. The Morrison project timeline got messed up somehow. Can you call them and sort it out? I looked up from the filing I was doing. That sounds like an operations issue. You might want to handle that through your new director role. Jake blinked. But you always handle the Morrison account. I handled communication overflow when needed. Now that we have a director of operations, project management should go through proper channels. I smiled pleasantly and returned to my filing. The first crisis hit at 10:15. A concrete delivery scheduled for the Henderson job site had been canceled due to a miscommunication about timing. Normally, I would have immediately called the supplier, rescheduled delivery, and coordinated with the crew to adjust their timeline. Today, I made note of the issue and continued with my assigned tasks. Sabrina! Jake appeared again, this time with genuine panic in his voice. The Henderson concrete got canceled. We have 8 guys standing around with nothing to do. That's terrible, I said sympathetically. Have you contacted the supplier about rescheduling? I don't have the account information. It should be in your director files. If not, you can call them directly. Henderson Concrete, they're in the phone book. Jake stared at me like I'd suggested he perform brain surgery. For 5 years, I had been his invisible safety net. handling these situations so seamlessly that he'd never learned to manage them himself. Without my automatic problem solving, he was completely lost. By noon, 3 different issues had piled up that would normally take me about 20 minutes total to resolve. Jake had spent 3 hours running between his office and my desk, growing progressively more frustrated as I directed him toward resources and procedures instead of just fixing everything myself. "This is ridiculous," he finally snapped. "Can't you just handle these things like always?" I leaned back in my chair and gave him my most professional smile. "Jake, I think there might be some confusion about role boundaries. As administrative assistant, I handle scheduling, filing, and basic communications. Strategic problem solving and client relations fall under operations management. That's your department now." The beauty of my new approach was that it was completely reasonable and absolutely infuriating. I wasn't being insubordinate or difficult. I was simply refusing to work outside my job description, something any employment lawyer would say was perfectly appropriate. Dad emerged from his office around 1 o'clock, drawn by the sound of Jake's increasingly desperate phone calls. "What's going on out here? Everything's falling apart," Jake complained. "The concrete delivery, the Morrison timeline, and Mrs. Patterson keeps calling about her kitchen renovation, but I don't know anything about kitchen renovations." Dad looked at me expectantly. "Sabrina, can you help Jake get caught up on these projects?" "I'd be happy to provide any administrative support he needs," I replied. "Jake, would you like me to transfer Mrs. Patterson to your direct line so you can address her concerns as Director of Operations? Have you ever experienced a moment where someone realizes they've made a terrible mistake? Hit that like button if you've ever watched someone's confidence crumble in real time." What happened next definitely shocked everyone, including me. By Thursday morning, Davis Construction was experiencing what I can only describe as controlled chaos. Jake had spent the previous afternoon making frantic phone calls, trying to untangle the mess of scheduling conflicts, supplier issues, and client complaints that had accumulated in just 2 days of him actually being responsible for operations. I arrived at my usual 9 o'clock, still adjusting to this novel concept of work-life balance, to find Jake already at my desk, looking like he hadn't slept. The bags under his eyes told me he'd probably spent the night trying to figure out systems I'd been managing effortlessly for years. "Sabrina, I need your help," he said without preamble. "I know we talked about role boundaries, but I'm drowning here." I set down my coffee and pulled out my chair. "What specifically do you need help with?" "Everything." He gestured helplessly toward his office, where I could see papers scattered across his desk like confetti. "The Morrison project is 3 days behind. Henderson's concrete still isn't scheduled, and somehow we double-booked the crew for next Tuesday." "That sounds overwhelming," I said sympathetically. "Have you tried using the project management system?" Jake stared at me blankly. "What project management system?" Oh, this was rich. For 2 years, I'd been maintaining a digital system that tracked every project timeline, resource allocation, and scheduling detail. I'd even given Jake a tutorial on it 18 months ago, which he'd clearly ignored because he thought he'd never need to use it. The one I set up in 2022. It's on the shared drive under Operations Management. All the current projects are tracked there with timelines, contractor assignments, and supplier information. I can't find it. Of course he couldn't. Jake's relationship with technology went about as deep as his Instagram account. "Would you like me to show you where it is?" "Would you?" The relief in his voice was almost pitiful. I walked him through accessing the system, explaining the color coding for project phases, the automated alerts for scheduling conflicts, and the supplier database with all the contact information he'd been desperately searching for. It took 15 minutes to show him tools that could solve most of his current crises. "This is incredibly detailed," Jake said, scrolling through months of data. "When did you create all this?" "Gradually, over the past few years. Whenever we had scheduling problems or communication breakdowns, I'd add features to prevent them from happening again." Jake was quiet for a moment, actually reading through project notes and timeline requirements. "Sabrina, this system is basically running the entire operations side of the business. It makes things more efficient," I said mildly. What I didn't say was that this system represented hundreds of hours of unpaid overtime, built because I'd gotten tired of watching the same preventable problems create unnecessary stress and cost overruns. What I also didn't say was that access to this system required my login credentials, which were about to become a very important detail. Jake spent the rest of Thursday working through his backlog with the help of my digital tools. By Friday, he seemed to be getting a handle on things, and I started to wonder if my little experiment in boundary setting was going to be less dramatic than I'd hoped. Then Friday afternoon brought the Williamson crisis, and everything fell apart again. The Williamson project was our biggest contract of the year, a custom home worth $200,000 with a completion deadline tied to their daughter's wedding in 6 weeks. Mrs. Williamson called at 3:30 in a state of controlled panic because she'd just discovered that the kitchen cabinets we'd ordered were the wrong style and would take 8 weeks to replace. Normally, I would have immediately called our cabinet supplier, negotiated an emergency rush order, found an alternative supplier if necessary, and coordinated with our installation crew to adjust the timeline. The whole crisis would have been resolved within 2 hours, and the clients never would have known how close they'd come to disaster. Today, I transferred Mrs. Williamson to Jake's direct line and returned to organizing invoices. 20 minutes later, Jake appeared at my desk looking pale. Mrs. Williamson is threatening to cancel the contract if we can't guarantee the kitchen will be finished on time. That would be a significant financial loss, I observed. Sabrina, I need you to call the cabinet supplier. You know how to handle these situations. I looked up from my filing. Jake, client crisis management is definitely a director-level responsibility. I wouldn't want to overstep my role as administrative assistant. This isn't about roles. This is about saving a $200,000 contract. Then it sounds like something the director of operations should prioritize. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below and let me know if you've ever watched someone realize they were in way over their head. Jake spent 2 hours on the phone with cabinet suppliers, getting nowhere fast. Without the relationship history I'd built with vendors over 5 years, without knowledge of which suppliers could handle rush orders, and without the negotiating skills that come from resolving dozens of similar crises, he was essentially starting from scratch in an emergency situation. By Monday morning, the Williamson situation had escalated. Mrs. Williamson had called Dad directly over the weekend, expressing concerns about whether Davis Construction could handle a project of this complexity. Dad had assured her that the company's best people were on the case, which was technically true if you counted me as one of the company's best people, and ignored the fact that I was no longer handling anything beyond my basic job description. Family meeting, Dad announced, appearing at my desk at 8:30. Conference room now. I followed him and Jake into the small conference room, curious to see how Dad would handle this crisis. He'd built Davis Construction from nothing over 20 years ago, so presumably he had problem-solving skills of his own, even if he'd grown accustomed to letting me handle the day-to-day disasters. The Williamson project is in jeopardy, Dad began. Jake, bring me up to speed on where things stand. Jake launched into a confused explanation involving multiple cabinet suppliers, conflicting delivery dates, and installation scheduling that made no sense. Watching him try to explain the situation was like watching someone describe a movie they'd only heard about secondhand. Dad listened with increasing frustration. This should be manageable. Sabrina handles supplier issues like this all the time. That's the problem, Jake said. She's not handling it. She says it's outside her job description. Both of them turned to look at me. I smiled politely and waited. Sabrina, Dad said finally, I think there's been some confusion about your responsibilities. I don't think so. I'm handling all the administrative tasks listed in my job description. Filing, basic scheduling, routine communications, everything's up to date. But you've always managed supplier relationships and client issues. I provided support when needed. But now that we have a director of operations, those responsibilities should flow through proper channels. Dad was quiet for a moment, and I could practically see him running calculations in his head. The Williamson contract represented nearly 15% of their annual revenue. Losing it would be a significant financial blow, and word of mouth in the construction business could make the damage much worse than one canceled project. Jake, can you give us a minute? After Jake left, Dad leaned back in his chair and studied me. What's this really about, sweetheart? I'm not sure what you mean. You're upset about the promotion decision. There it was. In Dad's mind, my sudden adherence to professional boundaries was nothing more than a temper tantrum about not getting my way. He couldn't conceive that I might have legitimate concerns about being overworked and undercompensated, or that his dismissive comments about women's business capabilities had fundamentally altered how I viewed our relationship. I'm not upset, I said calmly. I'm being professional. You made it clear that strategic problem-solving and leadership decisions are outside my skill set. I'm simply focusing on the work that matches my abilities and compensation level. Dad's expression shifted. For the first time, I saw him recognize that this wasn't emotional manipulation or a bid for attention. This was a fundamental change in how I was going to relate to the business going forward. The Williamson situation needs to be resolved, he said quietly. I agree. It's a significant contract. Can you help us resolve it? I considered the question carefully. I can provide administrative support for whatever solution Jake and you develop as company leadership. Translation. I can make phone calls and schedule meetings, but I'm not going to solve this problem for you. I'm not going to use my relationships with suppliers to save a situation that your chosen director of operations created through inexperience. Dad stared at me for a long moment. And I think he finally understood that something had fundamentally changed. His reliable daughter, who had been quietly holding his business together for 5 years, was no longer willing to work beyond her official role. The Williamson crisis resolved itself in the worst possible way. They canceled the contract. Jake's inexperience with supplier negotiations cost us our biggest project of the year, and word spread quickly through the local construction community that Davis Construction was having management problems. 2 more clients called that week requesting meetings to discuss project timelines and management structure. In construction, that's code for, "We're nervous about whether you can actually deliver what you've promised." I scheduled the meetings for Jake and Dad, noted them in the calendar, and continued with my filing. Wednesday afternoon, Dad appeared at my desk with a defeated expression. We lost the Henderson project. Mrs. Henderson had decided to go with a different contractor after Jake couldn't provide confident answers about timeline management and quality control oversight. Another $60,000 loss and another hit to the company's reputation. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "Sabrina, this can't continue." I looked up from the invoices I was organizing. What can't continue? This protest. Whatever you want to call it. The business is falling apart. I wouldn't call it a protest. I'm doing my job exactly as it's defined in my employment agreement. Dad pulled up a chair and sat down next to my desk. "Look, maybe I made a mistake with the promotion. Maybe we should reconsider the director position." This was interesting. A week ago, Jake's natural leadership abilities were exactly what the company needed. Now Dad was having second thoughts. What kind of reconsideration? Maybe a co-director structure, you and Jake sharing the responsibilities. I nearly laughed out loud. A co-director structure where I did all the actual work, and Jake got equal credit and compensation. It was the same arrangement we'd had for 5 years. Except now they'd make it official, and probably expect me to be grateful for the opportunity. That's generous. But I don't think that would work well. Why not? Because I'm tired of propping up other people's incompetence and calling it teamwork. Because I'm done accepting half the recognition for twice the effort. Because you've made it clear that you see my contributions as support rather than leadership, and changing the title won't change that fundamental disrespect. But what I said was, I think Jake deserves the chance to grow into the director role without interference. It wouldn't be fair to undermine his authority by splitting his responsibilities. Dad studied my expression, looking for some sign of the accommodating daughter he was used to dealing with. "What would it take for you to go back to handling the operational support?" There it was. The real question. Not whether I was qualified for promotion, not whether my contributions deserved recognition, but what it would take to buy my cooperation in maintaining the status quo. "I'm happy to provide any administrative support that falls within my job description," I repeated. "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have, Dad." He sat quietly for a moment, perhaps finally realizing that 5 years of taking my extra effort for granted had consequences. "The business needs your skills, Sabrina. Then maybe the business should compensate and recognize those skills appropriately. We can discuss salary adjustments. It's not about salary." This was true, though the money mattered too. "It's about being valued for what I actually contribute rather than being dismissed because of what you assume I can't do." Dad left my desk without another word, but I could see him thinking. The past week had been educational for everyone involved. Jake had learned that operations management required actual knowledge and skills. Dad had learned that his daughter's contributions were more substantial than he'd realized. And I had learned that I could survive perfectly well without their approval or recognition. But I was also starting to realize that Davis Construction might not survive without my contributions, which meant some much bigger decisions were on the horizon. Thursday morning brought what I'd been expecting all week, the desperate phone call from Jake at 6:30 a.m. I'd been up for an hour, enjoying my coffee and the novel experience of not being stressed about work before the day even started. "Sabrina, we have a major problem." Jake's voice was tight with panic. "The Morrison crew showed up, but the electrical inspection failed and now the whole timeline is screwed up. Dad's furious. And Mrs. Morrison is threatening to sue for delays." "That sounds stressful," I said calmly, taking another sip of coffee. "I need your help. I know where we left things yesterday, but this is an emergency. Have you tried calling the electrical inspector to understand what failed?" "Yes, but I don't understand half of what he's saying. And I don't know which electrician to call for repairs. And Mrs. Morrison wants a meeting today to discuss compensation for the delays." In the old days, I would have already been in my car, driving to the Morrison site to assess the situation personally. I would have called our regular electrician, scheduled the repairs, negotiated with the inspector for a priority reinspection, and prepared a detailed timeline for Mrs. Morrison that would have calmed her concerns and avoided any legal threats. Today, I finished my coffee and suggested that Jake check the vendor database for electrician contact information. When I arrived at the office at 9, Dad was waiting at my desk with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but something closer to defeat. "Sit down," he said quietly. I settled into my chair and waited. "The Morrison project is going to cost us $40,000 in delay penalties," he began. "The Henderson cancellation lost us $60,000. The Williamson cancellation lost us $200,000. In 1 week, Jake's inexperience has cost this company $300,000. I said nothing. "You know this business, Sabrina. You know it better than Jake, better than me in some ways. You've been holding it together for years, and I was too stupid to see it." This was as close to an apology as my father was capable of giving. An acknowledgement that he'd made a mistake, wrapped in the language of business consequences rather than personal feelings. "I appreciate you saying that. I want to offer you the director position, full authority, 30% salary increase, profit sharing, and Jake reports to you." 6 months ago, this offer would have felt like vindication. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd proven, finally being recognized and rewarded. The problem was, 6 months ago, I still believed that my father's respect was worth earning. "I'm flattered, but I'm going to decline." Dad's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, confusion, and then something like fear. "What do you mean, decline?" "I mean, no thank you. Sabrina, this is everything you wanted. This is everything I wanted 5 years ago. It's not what I want now." "Then what do you want?" I pulled an envelope from my desk drawer and handed it to him. 2 weeks' notice, effective today. Dad opened the envelope and read my resignation letter in silence. It was brief and professional, thanking him for the opportunity to work at Davis Construction and offering to help train my replacement during the transition period. "You're quitting," he said finally. "I'm pursuing other opportunities." "What other opportunities?" I smiled. For the first time in 5 years, I felt completely in control of my professional future. "I'm starting my own company. Davis Construction taught me everything I need to know about running a successful business." "Well, almost everything." "Your own company." Dad repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "Turns out women can understand business strategy after all. Who knew?" "Starting Thompson Construction." Yes, I took my mother's maiden name because symbolism matters, was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I'd been squirreling away money for years, living below my means and saving aggressively without really knowing why. Turns out my subconscious was preparing for exactly this moment. My first step was securing office space. Nothing fancy, just a small suite with room to grow. My second step was reaching out to the network I'd built over 5 years of managing client relationships for Davis Construction. Turns out a lot of people had been impressed with my work, even if my own family hadn't been. Mrs. Patterson, the sweet lady who'd watched Dad dismiss my contributions for years, was my first official client. Her kitchen renovation project wasn't huge, but it was a start. More importantly, she introduced me to her neighbor, who needed a bathroom remodel, who introduced me to her book club president, who was planning a home addition. Word of mouth in small communities works both ways. The same network that had heard about Davis Construction's recent management problems was also hearing about Richard Davis's daughter starting her own company. People were curious, and several clients who'd left Davis Construction during the chaos decided to give Thompson Construction a try. The best part about running my own business was finally being able to implement all the ideas I'd developed over the years, but never had authority to execute. Customer communication systems, project management protocols, quality control processes, all the innovations that had made Davis Construction more efficient were now making Thompson Construction competitive from day one. Within 3 months, I had 12 active projects and a growing reputation for reliability and transparent communication. Within 6 months, I'd hired 2 employees and was turning down work because of scheduling conflicts. The company that was supposed to fail because women don't understand business was outperforming established competitors, including Davis Construction. The first time I ran into Dad at the hardware store was awkward for exactly the reasons you'd expect. He looked tired, older somehow, and there was none of his usual confidence when he nodded hello. I was polite but distant, the way you'd greet any business acquaintance you didn't know particularly well. "How's the new venture going?" he asked, apparently unable to help himself. "Very well, thank you." "Well, how are things at Davis Construction?" His smile was strained. "Challenging. Jake's learning. But it's been a difficult transition." What he didn't say was that they'd lost 3 more major clients since I left, that their project completion times had doubled, and that their reputation in the community was still recovering from the series of disasters that had followed my departure. What I didn't say was that 2 of those clients had contacted Thompson Construction, and I was completing their projects ahead of schedule and under budget. "Growing pains are normal," I said diplomatically. "Sabrina, I owe you an apology." This conversation was happening in the plumbing supply aisle of Morton's Hardware. with other contractors and homeowners browsing around us. Not exactly the setting for a heart-to-heart reconciliation, but Dad had never been good at timing emotional conversations. "You don't owe me anything, Dad." "I do. I underestimated your capabilities, and I let my assumptions about gender affect my business judgment. That was wrong, and it cost all of us." I appreciated the apology, genuinely, but it was coming about 18 months too late to change anything fundamental between us. "Thank you for saying that. I hope things improve for Davis Construction." And I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want to see the business Dad had built from scratch fail completely. I just wasn't willing to sacrifice my own success to prevent it anymore. 2 years after leaving Davis Construction, Thompson Construction had grown into one of the most respected contracting companies in our area. We'd completed over 60 projects, maintained a perfect customer satisfaction rating, and built a team of 12 employees who actually enjoyed coming to work every day. The irony wasn't lost on me that Dad's dismissive comment about women not understanding business had motivated me to build a business that was outperforming his own. Sometimes the best revenge really is massive success, combined with the knowledge that you got there entirely through your own merit. The local business journal ran a feature story about Thompson Construction's rapid growth, focusing on our innovative project management systems and commitment to transparent communication with clients. The reporter asked about my background in construction, and I mentioned that I'd learned the industry working for a family business before striking out on my own. Dad called me the day after the article came out. "Congratulations on the feature story," he said. "You should be proud." "Thank you. I am proud of what we've built." "Sabrina, I have a proposition for you." Of course he did. "I'm listening." "Davis Construction is struggling. We've lost market share. Our reputation hasn't fully recovered, and frankly, Jake isn't cut out for operations management. I'm thinking about selling the business. That's a big decision. I'd like to sell it to you." The offer was both surprising and completely predictable. Dad had finally realized that his daughter understood business better than anyone else in the family, and now he wanted to transfer ownership of the company that had dismissed her capabilities for 5 years. "I'm flattered, but Thompson Construction keeps me plenty busy. You could merge the operations. Davis Construction has been in business for 25 years. The name recognition alone is worth something, even with recent problems. Dad, with respect, I've spent 2 years building a reputation for reliability and quality work. Why would I want to take on the liability of Davis Construction's recent management issues?" There was a long pause. "Because it's your family's legacy." "No," I said gently. "Davis Construction is your legacy. Thompson Construction is mine." 6 months later, I heard through the contractor grapevine that Dad had sold Davis Construction to a regional construction company that was mostly interested in their client database and equipment. Jake had taken a position as a project coordinator with the new owners, working under supervision and probably much happier without the pressure of running operations he'd never understood. I felt a brief moment of sadness for the end of Dad's business, but mostly I felt vindicated. The company that had survived and thrived was the one run by someone who actually understood the work, regardless of gender. Last month, Thompson Construction won a contract for the largest residential development project in our county's history. 18 custom homes with a total value of over $3 million. As I signed the contract, I thought about that conversation in Dad's office where he'd explained that women don't understand business strategy. Turns out we understand it just fine. We just understand it differently than men who inherit opportunities they never had to earn. The project will take 2 years to complete and will establish Thompson Construction as one of the premier residential contractors in the region. My team is excited about the challenge. My clients trust our capabilities, and my success belongs entirely to me. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life stories about women who refuse to accept other people's limitations. Sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is simply to prove yourself right, on your own terms, with your own rules. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop doing the extra work that nobody appreciates and watch them realize exactly what they've been taking for granted. I'm Sabrina Thompson, owner of Thompson Construction, and I wouldn't change a single thing about my journey to get here. Even the parts that hurt taught me something valuable. My worth was never up for debate. I just had to stop letting other people vote on it.